Do you see the right screen?
Perfect.
All right, that's a Christmas.
It's going to be a good networking meeting when the screen shares correctly the first try.
When Amy shares the screen correctly. Amy, this is Zoom challenge. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our first virtual Coaches Network meeting of the year. We had a few in the spring, but none kind of as focused as the one we're having today. And we want to tell you how much we appreciate you being here. In case you didn't know this, we moved fiscal agents this year, so we are now part of West 40. And we're also, probably this is the same as before, but we're a hub of the Center on PBIS, which is the national center. So just to give you a little bit of feedback about that, a little bit of info. So our topic for today is about returning to learning, and we like how that sounds together, so we think it's a pretty good sounding start. If you haven't seen these, if you weren't on our earlier Coaches Network meetings in the spring, you might not have seen these, but this is an example of some learning expectations for virtual training. So I want to point out that you would, of course, put your school-wide expectations on the left and then what you're looking for in the boxes on the right. And we would like to encourage you not to put, to make it okay if kids can't use their cameras if you are doing learning by Zoom. So it really does help, but we also know that there are some kids and families who aren't going to be in the boat to do that. So today you'll have the opportunity to chat, and we're going to put you in some breakout rooms, but if you can, use the mute and unmute button, mute when you're not talking. Right next to that button in the bottom is the how to turn your video on and off. And then you can chat directly with us or with, I didn't introduce myself, did I? Woo, good start. I will introduce myself here in a minute. There's a chat button where you can post with us, chat with us from Midwest, or you can also chat with each other. We're really hoping that you'll be able to generate some ideas that you can share. So it is very important for you to know that your private chats are actually not private after you hang up. So like if you're going to comment, you should text. The comment shouldn't be read by everyone on a billboard next to us. So let's see, in the upper right, you have this button where there are 9 little squares, and you can click on that and it will help you see everybody. This is just for your personal screen. And let's see, the gallery view is how you make sure that you can see everybody's faces. From the bottom of the screen, if you click on participants, there are a list of reactions where you can raise your hand, you can say yes, no, go slower, go faster. You can give us some feedback that way if you click on participants. And to make sure that we are able to get you your PDHs, we're not offering CEUs, but we are offering PDHs for our time together today. To make sure that we get you your PDHs, could you make sure your name is on your picture with your first and last name? So you can do that by just clicking on your picture in the upper right hand corner, clicking on the three dots, and then you'll have the opportunity to rename yourself. But first and last name is super helpful for us when our person is trying to get all those PDHs out. Finally, we are going to have some breakout rooms in Zoom. Our plan is to break you out into groups of 5 or so. We'll randomly do that the first time, and then you'll be with your same 5 for the rest of our time together, because we want to make sure that you have plenty of time to network with one another, share ideas, talk through things, and problem solve. So we'll get you randomly assigned. When you are in your breakout room, there is a button at the bottom that says you can ask for help. And if you need to leave the breakout room for some reason, there's a button on the bottom right that says leave breakout room. So you signing in should get you your PDHs, your sign in, basically records how long you were participating, and then you won't get an eval this time, you'll just get the PDHs. So And of course, my dog's gonna bark right now. It's awesome. So how about I introduce myself? My name's Amy Flamini. I'm really sorry I forgot to do that at the beginning. And my colleagues, Katie Pullman and Diana Master, we're gonna be facilitating this together. They're on dog alert in case something goes crazy at my house. I might toss it over to them. There's too much barking. So if there were points involved, imaginary points involved, you get extra credit if you know who our newest team member is. And I'm just gonna share with you that it is Trisha Schroed, who is on the top right row in the blue shirt. Trisha is our newest technical assistance director. She's going to be training, and she's also going to be doing grant work, so looking for grants and development projects for us. So if you're not familiar, Brian Meyer and Kelly Perales are our co-directors. You just met Katie, me, and Diane, and then there's Trisha. Lucille Eber used to be the director of the Illinois PBIS network, and now she still participates with our work, but isn't the director. And then we have Jennifer, Cheryl, Alana, and Patty, who keep us all going and make sure that Zoom's taken care of, registrations are taken care of, billing is taken care of. They're really overloaded a lot. So anyway, just want to make sure you knew that we had a new member. So there's going to be a poll. So here's what I'm hoping. I've never done a poll on Zoom before.
Okay, that's up to me. I think that's me. Is that my, I think I launched this poll.
That's why I'm not doing it. Okay, so we're gonna have you answer a poll question. This is maybe my first experience with polls on Zoom. But we want you to give us a little bit of information about your knowledge base. So how would you rate your knowledge of PBIS? I'm new, I know it, I'm just not sure I know it correctly. I know how to implement with fidelity, and I'm comfortable coaching. And then if you would put your current role, that would be awesome.
Great, starting to see lots of responses. We're at about 60% people have voted.
I always think it sounds so funny when we're narrating these things because it reminds me of that Saturday Night Live skit where the NPR, they're doing NPR around Christmas.
Yes.
They're like 3 people or 4 people sitting behind a table and they're just like navigating it all, monitoring it. I always feel a little like that when we do Zoom calls. Let's see what the answers are here.
Well, we're above 80%. So Diane, let's end the poll and share
the results.
Perfect.
All right, so no newbies. About 19% not sure they know it correctly. 36, I'm comfortable, do it with fidelity. And 45% of you are already coaching. We have 23% of you are district level coaches, 55 are school level coaches, and 9% are team members. So I'm hoping, based on how we've structured today, that this is actually even going to be better for people who are school level people. It will give some district level people ideas, but I think I'm hoping that school level people will find it very useful. We did have over 680 Illinois schools recognized this year for implementation. You can find information about that on our website if you are interested. There are a variety of resources available to you in case you weren't aware of this or not, but on PBIS.org, which is the national PBIS website, which everything that goes on there is vetted, and so you can trust what goes on there. There are COVID resources on there. We have a link in your PowerPoint for that. And it's pretty obvious when you go to PBIS.org where the COVID resources are. So we're going to get you connected in groups. Here's what we want you to talk about in your group. We basically want you to introduce yourselves to your new group, the district, title, role. If you have a return to learn plan, like if you know you're Zooming or you're hybrid or you're all in person, we'd like for you to be able to share that with each other. And then we want you to tell each other how comfortable you are with the plan that you have. A 1 to 5. Like 1, I'm super comfortable. Oh, 1, I'm super uncomfortable. 5, I'm very comfortable. And so it's always a good reminder that we're all in different places about how we feel this should go, what we believe this should look like. So we have to show each other a lot of grace when we're all talking, because we may all be on different pages, and that's fine. We just want you to be able to have some time to connect with each other. So Diane is going to put you in your random groups. If you have any,
You're already there.
if you have any trouble, don't forget there's a button at the bottom that says I need help, and a button that says get me out of this breakout room. Actually, it says leave breakout room.
Okay, so I'm going to open all the rooms. That option on the rooms.
All right, so Diane, we help them of recording. I'm going to resume recording. So hopefully in your introductions to your 5 coaches to connect with today went well, and you got to know each other's faces, and we will connect a few more times, and we're really hoping that that gives you the opportunity to have some conversation and share some examples and where your thinking's at in small groups, so that we can bring back and share more in the large group. So I put in chat at the beginning, we would love your grace and as well as your feedback at the end of this, so we can continue to improve and make these these virtual coaches network meetings as beneficial as possible as the year goes on. So we know this is new for us as far as coaches network meetings, and we really want to make that well. So the theme for this year, these are 4 key messages from what we call the Interconnected Systems Framework, which is really about integrating PBIS and school mental health. So using our PBIS framework to integrate and align all support for social, emotional, and behavioral support. So we want to continue to reinforce and build capacity among all of our coaches with these 4 key messages. So as we go through the year, you're going to hear us talk about single system of delivery and pushing beyond just making a referral or beyond access for a student, but knowing that we actually are measuring and knowing that the supports we provide are getting outcomes. You're going to hear us continue to talk about this message of mental health is for all. How do we support the mental health, social, emotional, behavioral needs of all staff, all students, and all families? And we really think that key message will be a ringing message as we go through today's content. How do we develop our Tier 1 supports to meet the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of all of our students, families, and staff during these times of pandemic? And that we know that the core features of a multi-tiered system of support are essential to provide social, emotional, and behavioral supports to all students. So we know that mental health is for all key message there. We know that we have so many students that we are serving in our districts and in our schools across our country. And we also know the needs of those students during these times of a pandemic are on the rise. There are more needs for students, and those needs are different than we've served before. And if we continue to work in the same ways that we have, using only our school-based clinicians as the social emotional support for students' needs in our building, we do not have enough of those school-based clinicians to serve all the needs of all the students. We have to change the way we're looking at supporting students' needs. And so they're floating away, that you might even have less school-based clinicians in your setting, and the needs are still there. So we have to think differently about how we support the social, emotional, behavioral needs of our youth and build the capacity of all of our staff to support those needs. So we can use those school-based clinicians to help us build capacity, but it's about using our multi-tiered system in our framework to identify and align the resources that we have to most efficiently and effectively meet the needs. So as we get started, we want you to think about, as you ended last year, or the last time you took your tiered fidelity inventory, or the TFI, as your teams, what were some of your action steps? What were you working on within your PBIS implementation to improve your implementation pre-COVID? And now, how is COVID shifting those action steps? So what were some things you needed to enhance within your framework, within your implementation of Tier 1 before COVID? And now where might you be with COVID? So just think for a second, but keep that in mind, because what we want is for us to be utilizing PBIS as our framework, and we want that tiered fidelity inventory to continue to be our guiding light. So you'll hear us say that again. So we're using this framework of PBIS for returning to learning. And why is that? Because throughout history, we've in the past, educational history, we've had so many changing landscapes that have come up. You can probably look at all of these topics on here, and many of you have lived through these topics. And every time it comes back to our educational settings shifting and changing and problem solving and figuring out how do we continue to meet the needs of students. And the good news is, and now we're being faced with a new challenge of remote instruction or educating students during a pandemic. And the good news is we have a framework that you already are implementing in your school that gives you the problem solving pieces to make solid plans. So we want to think about our PBIS as being the organizational system and framework to leading us to improving our outcomes for students. If we think about PBIS as data, using data to make decisions, identifying practices that work for students, and putting the systems in place to support the adults to implement those practices, then we can continue to problem solve how we're going to meet the needs of all of our students, staff, and families during a pandemic. So we want to think about it as this framework. So when people say, well, we don't have time for PBIS this year because we're trying to educate our students remotely, so we're just not going to do PBIS, then we don't have a true understanding of what is PBIS. PBIS is way more than the acknowledgement system. So we need to be able to say, well, we need to use data to make decisions this school year. We need our data to guide how we're going to meet social emotional needs of our students that are really high right now. We need to be thinking about strategies and practices that work and maybe make some shifts in how we use those practices, but we need to go back to the evidence base that we know, right? And PBIS is Tier 1 has many of those evidence-based practices that we're going to talk about. And we have to continue to support our adults through this time of a pandemic. What supports are our adults going to need to make those pivots, make those shifts in the practices that we're implementing? So PBIS is our framework. We have to have the frame of our house. We have to build the studs and the framework and have the walls before we can buy the furniture to put in it. The good news is you have your framework. You've been implementing PBIS for however long that may be for your school or your district. And now you're replacing some furniture. You're doing some remodel as you go through pandemic, but you have the framework. And so that's where we want to guide you today, is really thinking about the core components of Tier 1 implementation as your framework, and then how can you shift your thinking for whatever kind of instruction you have for today, or for going back to school this year. That slide was in there twice. So think about your TFI action steps and where you were at again. And again, we want that TFI, that tiered fidelity inventory, to be your guiding light. So when we think we're going to be thinking about what are some enhancements, or how does that TFI feature look, for remote instruction or hybrid instruction? What's it already look like in person, and what are some considerations for remote or hybrid? And that means that there's not a right or wrong answer necessarily on remote or hybrid implementation of PBIS, because this is new to everyone. But what we do know is if we lean on something that is reliable and valid, such as the TFI, and we plan from there, we're going to be more likely to make the adjustments that are going to get us the outcomes that we need. So these core features of Tier 1, the components of Tier 1, all are pulled out of and align with the TFI. So now you just notice these core features of teaming and leadership and which component of the TFI those align with. So we're going to continue in our focus today to come back to these boxes with these Tier 1 components. And we want to give you this lens to look through to think about, what does this implementation already look like kind of traditionally in our in-person implementation? And now, how might that look if we're thinking hybrid instruction? How might that look if we're thinking virtual? So we hope that we're not giving you something new to implement. We don't need something new. We just need a different lens to look through and a different way of problem solving and thinking. So our structure today is going to be, here's what we think it already kind of looks like in person or our traditional implementation, and then give you considerations for hybrid or virtual. We want our examples to be pretty quick, and you can always come back to those in our PowerPoint. The link for where the materials are is in the beginning of the chat for today. So you can come back to those. But what even more importantly is going to be in your small breakouts, sharing more ideas and then being able to share those in our large group as well. So here's an example. Relationships and connections are built into all of our Tier 1 components, or should be. However, we are so we wanted to kind of pull it out and highlight it as our example of how things are going to be structured. So traditionally, in person, that might look like all teachers greet students at the door. They have some way of acknowledging and greeting students as they come in. Hybrid, that might mean that they need to modify their greeting at the door, right? We're not going to be giving high fives and hugs to students during our social distancing, so we might need to modify. Remote might mean we still want to greet every student, and so maybe in our virtual classrooms or Zoom or whatever platform we're using, if we have a waiting room, then maybe we let students in one at a time, and we do a greeting to each student just like we would at the door, at the physical doorway, but now we have a virtual doorway, and we greet each student in the same manner. So how, just taking that, here's what it looks like in person, now put my lens on it, and how can I shift that? There is a document, it's not quite posted at pbis.org yet, the National Center's website, but it will be soon. We have it posted with the materials for today, and some ways to shift on what that greeting, physical greetings might look like in a social distancing way. So I've seen a lot of these, but this was specifically from our National Center. We can also think about conducting and implementing virtual circles. So if any of you use circles to help form relationships and in your classrooms and communities within your classrooms with your staff, how might you be doing that virtually as well? So there's a couple of links here for some examples and tips for facilitating virtual circles. Didn't realize that was actually going to play. Same thing, then another example of some family circles. That, again, I know this link I posted with materials, we might need to get the other two up there, but I think they're in the PowerPoint for you. So just giving you some ideas to think about. So in chat, oops, one slide too many. As we transition here, in chat, share any ideas that you've talked about for returning to learn and connecting with students and staff, and how you're supporting your staff to think about that.
So they're going to magically appear into their rooms?
No, this is just in chat, Amy.
Just in chat. Okay,
So
got it.
just sharing some ideas in chat, and then I think I'm tossing it back to you for system. Can we see the slide again? With the prompt, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so, Katie. Yeah, there we go.
Sharing ideas for how you're planning to connect with youth as they return to learn. And I'm going to stop sharing because we're actually switching over presenter. So Amy's going to start sharing. Thank you, Faith. Faith saying offering virtual greeting options. So I definitely think as coaches, you know, we can help give lots of ideas and helping teachers to have some choice in how they differentiate that for their classrooms, but giving them lots of ideas and really encouraging the idea of routines for relationship building. So might look different in each classroom. However, we do expect that there's you know, that there are routines set for how you establish relationships. And I'm seeing some ideas around families, family nights virtually, welcome back assemblies.
Katie, am I up correctly?
You are. All right, Amy, and I think we'll have you go on into some systems pieces. If you have other ideas, continue to share those in chat.
Awesome. I love that welcome back video highlighting your theme for the year. That's a great idea. As a matter of fact, I know some of the universities are doing that, where they have somebody from their administrative office do videos, and they send the video out to parents as a way to welcome them because they're not coming back. So that's can be a great option. So I mentioned in the chat box, when Katie showed you this slide, I just want to go back for 1 second. When Katie showed you this slide, I use this slide a lot whenever I'm talking to a staff to talk to them about what a PBIS team does. So I think it can be really useful to help get your team to understand that you're not just all planning parties, that this is really about a framework where you're using data and you're making decisions. And so I just wanted to point that out to you, that this can be a really good slide to do that with. Typically when I show it to staff, I don't show them the one with all of the TFI numbers on it, because that might make someone's head explode. So here we go. So we're going to move into the systems section. So when we're looking at the systems that we're going to look at today and that are on that circle include teaming and leadership, having a system for teaching, and having a system for giving feedback and acknowledgments. So I had a district administrator say to me, we don't have time to do PBIS right now, and that's kind of what Katie was saying at the beginning. I think it's going to be really important. That's somebody who, well, I thought they did, but they don't really understand what we're really talking about then, because we, all teachers, all educators, all staff need to know how to do these kinds of things and how to address the social, emotional, behavioral wellness for all kids. So we're going to talk about teaming and leadership, a system for teaching, and a system for acknowledging. So as Katie mentioned, we have the setup, this first slide. These are the questions that we think would be good for you to start considering if you haven't already. So the numbers on the left are the numbers that match the TFI. So do you need new team members? I think this could be the perfect time to add a family member to your team, to make sure you have family voice and choice as part of your work. Do you need to change your teaming procedures? Do you need to change when you meet? Do you need to change how often you meet? You definitely have to be meeting in order to get this work done. What training and coaching do your staff need to actually do the work you're asking them to do? How are you going to share data with your faculty? And how are you going to gain input on how you're adjusting implementation, right? So we want, if you are moving from brick and mortar to hybrid or Zoom, we want to make sure that people understand that your framework doesn't go away just because your platform changed. So how are you going to get that data to the faculty? And then how are you going to be getting the family input? So remember, families often have great ideas about how to acknowledge kids and how to teach kids and how to do things. So we just don't want to overlook getting their voice in. So this is what it typically looks like when we have a PBIS building that's implementing with Fidelity, right? You have a team that's represents your building. You have operating procedures. You know when you're going to meet. You know how you're going to take notes. You know who's going to lead. You have regular opportunity to do PD with your staff. You regularly involve your faculty in different ways, whether that's surveys, posting data, and you are doing surveys or having family members be on your teams. At least annually, you're getting their feedback through a survey. So what does teaming and leadership look like when we're hybrid and remote? So when we're hybrid and remote, you might need to start thinking about your professional development, being in recorded modules, so 10-minute modules where somebody can listen to them. They don't have to listen to them live. You might need to add technology representation to your team, meaning you may need to have somebody join your PBIS Tier 1 team who's good with technology. This could be the perfect time to add a mental health provider that comes to your district or building to your team. So you do want to really think through how you're going to meet and how that's going to look. I know that because we were kind of in emergency mode in the spring, a lot of us weren't meeting with teams, but we want to get that back on schedule. And we want to really think about how we're going to do faculty involvement in this work. Is it going to be a memo? Is it going to be a check-in with staff? And how are we going to do that with family? So there's no magic to any of this. It's just kind of thinking through how are we going to take what we were doing and do it this new way. So we wanted to point out to you that there's a team meeting forum, the team implementation. Diane, I just let the name just left me.
Team initiated problem solving.
Oh, good. There we go. The tips form, couldn't think of it. The tips form, and this has added that we're either meeting face-to-face or virtually, and then it has you adding some different team norms. So come with your electronics charge, show your camera, have only agenda and documents open. And then on this next slide, you can see that maybe in your team meeting, it's time to have some reflection with your team members, like what's the most generous act you've seen, what's giving you hope, what's the best thing that's happened, what's the silver lining. But basically, doing emotional check-ins is always worth the time when we're trying to have a team do work together. When you're thinking about professional development, so we're still under that category of teaming and leadership, when you're thinking about professional development, things you might need to think about are how are you going to help support your staff do behavior-specific praise distally? How are they going to do that when they're teaching on Zoom? How are they going to do their greetings and check-in, which Katie already mentioned? How are you going to start talking to your staff about kids who've experienced trauma? We know that the pandemic has created a lot of events for a lot of kids and families about homelessness and evictions and people losing their jobs. And we also want to make sure that we are addressing with our staff the Black Lives Matter movement. So checking in with Black Lives Matter at School group is a great group to check in with. But we don't want to overlook that. Overlooking it and not talking about it is really not a great idea. We want to address this and we want to empower our kids and our families to be part of that conversation. How are you going to address staff self-care? We do have a short recording for you. Could you teach them how to do virtual circles? That video that Katie showed you a minute ago that was linked into the PowerPoint is basically everything you need to know about how to do a virtual circle. And how are you going to help your staff know how to respond to inappropriate behavior? So these all fall in on the team, on the Tier 1 team, to help make the transition. So when you're getting input on the foundations of Tier 1, here are some of the questions you might need to ask. So how are the new rules being defined? How are we talking about masks? How are we talking about new routines, washing our hands, using sanitizer? Are we still teaching our social emotional behavioral lessons that you were using? Because you don't want to stop. So if you were a second step school, don't stop teaching second step. You want to make sure that this continues, because now is the time when they need them even more than before. And having some opportunity to discuss how you're using acknowledgements. And then the same thing goes under that student and family column. I'm not going to go through all of those, but they're there for you. So that was a system for teaming, and now we're going to talk about having a system for teaching. So some of the questions we think that you need to ask about teaching are, when are we going to teach, who's going to teach, and how will we know that the kids are responding to what we're teaching? So remember, our data drives what we're going to teach and reteach, and we need to have thought through how that's really going to look depending upon our environment. So an example of what that could look like before pandemic was we taught our SEB lessons on Monday during homeroom, and the teacher taught them. And then we also had a system to look at our teaching through the walkthrough by the coach. So one of the things that you want to think about now, if we're moving into hybrid or remote, is could you have, if you're hybrid, could you have the in-person days include your SEL lesson, so that you're getting that time to connect with kids in face-to-face? And remotely, could you decide that every teacher is going to teach them at the same time on Mondays, and looking at different ways to engage your remote learners? So that can be things like thumbs up, thumbs down, polling options, chat box. That can be Zoom rooms. It could also be having a remote lesson that you have kids watch, and then you have the teacher on Monday talk about the lesson. So I just saw this really great, yes, Kim, if you have a tornado warning, you should definitely go. Good call. I just saw this great article. It was in CNN this morning about what virtual learning can look like. And I loved it because this teacher talked about having a teaching math skills, teaching fractions. The teacher videoed the family making dinner using fractions in different ways, and then had the kids watch that, and then the kids talked about it as part of the lesson. So we need to kind of really make sure this isn't getting, it's not falling off our plate. So we have some examples of behavior lesson plans. Remember, behavior lesson plans do not need to be complicated. We have a shared lesson plan in here about, from Devereaux, about how to, a lesson plan about wearing your masks. And we should all be prepared that we are gonna have kids and families who don't wear masks outside of school ever. And we need to be ready to teach that idea that we have different expectations in different places. So that we need to be ready for that we also may have families who don't believe that the pandemic is a thing. So we need to be ready. How are we going to address that? And we can do that through our lesson plans. Embedding it into your lesson plans or into your daily curriculum is a great way to do this. So whatever objective your teacher has for that class period, what is being responsible on Zoom or in hybrid going to look like for those students? And then finally, we need to look at the system. So we just looked at the system for teaming and the system for acknowledgements, and we need to look at the system for, let me start that over. We just looked at the system for teaming, and we looked at the system for teaching, and now we're going to look at the system for feedback. So some questions we think that you should consider would be, How are we going to do specific praise and error correction on Zoom or in hybrid? If we weren't doing it before, how are we going to start working on this now, no matter which way we're teaching? And what kind of short-term, immediate and intermediate, long-term acknowledge can we use now that kids are maybe aren't in the classroom with us? So here's what I want to caution you about. I really want to caution you that it would be really easy to spend all of your time here talking about how we're going to acknowledge kids. And if you think back to your early PBIS days, if you've been implementing for a while, where tier 1 teams tend to go off track is they don't use data and they spend all their time talking about acknowledgements. And you don't want to get in that boat. This is the time where you can frame this in a way that's going to be super helpful in terms of keeping this as only a part of your implementation. So now, I think that this is a lofty goal, but ideally we're providing behavior-specific praise with a 4-to-1 ratio, and occasionally we're using tangibles, things like Redbird tickets where you can redeem them bi-weekly, that sort of thing. So if you're hybrid, could we still focus on shooting for a 4-to-1 ratio when we're in person with our tickets? Could we still provide behavior-specific praise, which is what BSP stands for? And could we deposit a ticket into a kid's envelope, right? So if you're trying to get away from me touching the ticket, then you touching the ticket, and then someone else touching the ticket, could we just have an envelope on the kid's desk that we slide the ticket into? And if we're remote, how are we going to get our staff to make sure that they understand that they still need to use specific praise? Verbal and nonverbal. It could be the hand signals, it could be chat, it could be a whiteboard, it could be all different kinds of ways, but we need to think through this and have a system for it so everybody's not making up their own. So you can also distribute your tickets digitally, and we're going to talk more in a minute about group contingencies and school-wide acknowledgements. So those can all be on your radar. So what we've done here is we have just put in here the slide about the reminders of what we're looking for with high frequency, intermittent, and short term. I choose to ignore midterm, but high frequency, intermittent, and short term, we want to address all of those for kids and our staff. Who's going to be acknowledging our staff over the short and long term? Do we need to go back and reteach behavior-specific praise? So if you're a high school, don't do that if you haven't done some surveying with your staff asking them what they need, because that will just be not good. So if you're a high school, make sure you're getting input on what staff need before you start providing PD. That'd be great if it was everywhere, but especially at the high school level. So how are we going to make sure that they know how to give behavior-specific praise in chat, on a whiteboard, verbally when kids are in front of us on the camera? So what I'd like for you to do is in chat, write a praise statement. Oh, I know. So let me move something here. Can't get my chat box to go away, so then it's in my way. So on your slide here in the upper hand where it says safe, respectful, responsible, safe, and then I can't get that to move. There we go. The Wilson Way, classroom rules. So Diane was demonstrating listening, and so you can see that somebody followed the steps on the left. The steps for behavior-specific praise are identify the student, that's Diane. Include a term of praise, awesome. Describe what they're doing, they're listening to the speaker. And then it's best practice if we can tie that back to the Wilson Way, and then maybe we'll provide a tangible. So we want you to do a praise example in the chat box. So I'm going to leave the steps up here. I'm going to take a drink of soda, and see, someone got it. I thank you. But write one of those in the chat box, please. These are great. So what I want to remind you of is that we don't want to assume anyone knows how to do this. What we know from observations in buildings is that we have a lot of good jobs, thank you, but we don't have a lot of using specific praise to shape behavior. And this is one of the best ways to shape behavior. So we want to make sure we're not overlooking that. When we're virtually, here's an example. Thank you for your virtual hand raise. That's how we show respect. Team A completed the Google Classroom prompt before our meeting. Well done, way to show responsibility. So those are just some other examples. Let's see, physical and digital versions of, let me close this again, of examples of acknowledgements. So it could be a digital entry form, or you could stick with the tickets. So I know one building that I worked with in the spring did, they did tickets like they would do in person, but they just did them. So Katie, thank you so much for showing eye contact on Zoom. That's a great way to show respect for our learning environment. And so then I put a ticket in our bucket, in our class bucket, and then I do a drawing. And then the person who won the drawing from the class then got a pizza delivered to their house. You don't have to have money to do this, though. It could just be extra one-on-one time with the teacher and the classroom aide, or it could be they get an extra turn or something that doesn't have to cost money when you're thinking this through. If we're going to do this electronically, we do want to make sure that it's easy and accessible for the teachers, because we don't want them to be any more overwhelmed than we're already making them. So remember, digital tokens are given, if they're given without specific praise, we're kind of wasting our time. So if we want to shape behavior, we have to make sure we're using behavior-specific praise. So an example from Florida PBIS is listed in here of alternatives to having tokens. So it could be positive phone calls, surprise events, and it gives you examples of all for one for all, and each their own when we're going to do group contingency work. So I'm not going to read that to you, but that slides in here, and that link for Facebook Nevada is there. We put a chart in our PowerPoint that we just made where we took immediate, how are you going to redeem immediate tickets, how are you going to do intermittent, and how are you going to do long-term school-wide, and then what that's going to look like in each location, so your team could spend some time talking about that and getting organized. So now I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to put you back in your groups. And what we'd like for you to do is decide, out of those 3 areas, we just talked about a system for team meetings, a system for teaching, a system for feedback and acknowledgements. In your time together, what do you want to spend your time talking about? And what are your current plans? And can you brainstorm together a little bit about what that's going to look like? So we'll leave, the slide doesn't show up when you go in your breakout room, so somebody from your group might want to take a screenshot, a picture of that. To have
Okay, I'm going to open rooms, and yep, I see people saying thunderstorm, and we're going to get hit here in about the next hour or so too. If not,
I was not assigned.
okay, then I'm going to send you to a room with only a few people.
All right, I think everybody is popping back in. I love when technology is working. So as you're coming back in, this is a networking meeting. So our goal is for you to be sharing ideas and learning from one another as well. So what great ideas or new ideas or action steps did you come up with during that breakout room? What are some new ideas you had around teaming, teaching, and acknowledgements and feedback? You can share via chat. Also feel free to come off of mute and share with your voice.
So my group talked a lot about the videos and stuff. We like the idea of the videos for parents and for kids, of like what's expected of everyone, and just all the new, how you're going to do remote learning and how to bring your supplies to the table. And if you are hybrid, wearing a mask and how that's going to look, and then social distancing, and the idea of just having the videos out there and sharing them around, because we're all going to have those videos, was like a big, and it's just easy, you know, if a kid has to be pulled, and like we're a one-to-one school, so it's a little bit easier for us to do videos and like send them out. But just, it's all going to look so different. So it's like really focusing on all those expectations too, but not only for the kids, but for the parents.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks for modeling some really great engagement and sharing out verbally. I appreciate that.
Oh, while Katie waits for the next person, you could do things like this for behavior-specific praise. This was $1.97 at Walmart, so you're not going to be able to buy that many of them. But
what else? I see Beth saying behavior-specific praise with team and staff during meetings. Could be your idea or something you learned from others.
Our team talked about teaching and really how everybody's sort of starting over with all the teaching, the academic content, the behavioral expectations content, and when will that happen? How often will that happen? And I was saying that I think in our building, we keep a spreadsheet of, it's data driven, and it's what our circles topics are for that day and the week, and it's for the whole school year, so that we're all the same thing. I think stuff in, the expectations about remote learning, how to use a mask appropriately, how to be safe, all those things.
Great, thanks, Kara. And Maggie's saying yes to Beth's point. So as you're starting up staff meetings, we always say whatever we are asking staff to do with students, we should be doing with staff, right? And so as you're starting up and you're having virtual staff meetings, how are you modeling behavior-specific praise? How are you modeling teaching? So if we are asking the teachers to do these things with students, how can we also model that as you're starting up? So that's a great way to build, to give the model part of our teach, model, practice. And then we can have them begin to practice. Amy had you guys practice in chat using behavior-specific praise, right? So how can we then push that into that practice component as well? So great. If there are documents that you want to share, we do have file sharing set up on this chat. So as we continue to move forward here in our in this networking meeting, we do hope if you have an example of a lesson plan, or you have an example of a modified rubric or something that you would be willing to share, we invite you to share it in chat, and we'll also share a way that we are trying to build for coaches to share with each other as well. So Amy and Diane, I'm gonna check, am I sharing the right screen as we get started? Okay, we're gonna move in.
Like where the camera is, the opposite thing just doesn't really work out.
All right, so we're moving into practices. So remember, we're thinking PBIS as a framework is data, systems, and practices. And practices are the components of Tier 1 that support student behavior. So as we think about practices, we're thinking about having shared vision and expectations, how we define those rules and routines for those aligned with our school-wide expectations. And we need to have practices that are evidence-based for preventing and responding to inappropriate behavior. So with vision and expectation, we're thinking item 1.3 and 1.8 from our tiered fidelity inventory. And some of those key questions, as Amy kept modeling with systems, the key questions for vision and expectations are, how will our staff connect all the work they're doing back to our school-wide expectations? How do they already do that in person, and what's that going to look like hybrid or remote? How will you know if how will you know that they're making that connection? So we can have all the best systems in the world to say this is what we want staff to be doing. We want staff to have classroom matrices, but if we don't go through and make sure that staff have a classroom matrix, that it's posted. We don't observe every once in a while to see that staff are using that behavior specific phrase and connecting it to our school-wide acknowledgements, then, or school-wide expectations, then we really don't know that that's happening, right? So we always have to build in that way of monitoring. So what we think that might currently look like in your implementation is, we have our family, youth, and students who have helped us define what our school-wide expectations are, and that we've defined, so if that's be safe, be responsible, be respectful, or maybe that's positive, respectful, integrity, dedicated, and I was trying to go with pride, but I can't think of any. Excellence, maybe engaged, there we go. But we defined our school-wide expectations, and we have our stakeholders who are helping us determine what those are, so that we really are creating common language, common expectations, and common practices. We all have to share one vision. If that consistency is important and going to matter, especially as we're transitioning during this time of pandemic, and what does education look like? If we're not all going in the same direction, we're going to struggle. So using our common, consistent vision and school-wide expectations will really help us with that consistency. So the 3 to 5 overarching school-wide expectations, and then we want to define out what those look like and think about routines and procedures. So even though we might already have our school-wide behavioral matrix or in-person instruction, there's probably a need right now, even if you're going back 100% in person this fall, there's probably a need to go back to our behavioral matrix and say what routines and procedures are shifting based on social distancing. We might not all be walking on the right-hand side of the hallway. We definitely aren't going to be giving high fives. We are going to be wearing a mask in certain areas of our building, and at certain routines and times. So what's that going to look like? Our cafeteria procedures are definitely going to look different. We might have mask breaks. Those are routines in different areas that you will need to adjust on your matrix. And the more we can be common and consistent in the language and the procedures for doing that, the more likely all students, staff, and families will be able to follow those, right? It's going to be, we know it's not going to be perfect for all students to be able to wear masks and social distance. However, we do know when we're consistent in how we define that and how we teach that and we acknowledge that, we're going to have hopefully 80 to 90% of our students respond if we're doing that with fidelity and doing that well. So hybrid and remote, we are probably going to have to think about our school-wide expectations will most likely remain the same, but we probably need to think about when are those going to be reviewed and when are those going to be taught. We talked a little bit about that in the teaching section, and we probably need to think about modifying how we define those and which routines are going to be added to our matrix. So one example is from the National Center. This was put out this spring on an example of a remote learning matrix at an elementary level. This is posted with the materials today. It's a link to a brief. So, how can you help all staff develop a remote learning matrix, and what things will be common across all settings? Which ones will teachers have a little bit of their own rules for, but still aligning to our school-wide expectations, so we have that common, consistent language. We may need to, as I mentioned, come back and modify our school-wide behavioral matrix for in-person learning with some of the social distancing precautions that we will have in place. And we definitely will need to be thinking about some additional pieces for if we're hybrid learning as well. Here's another example within classroom rules from Florida PBIS network. So what it might have looked like before and what might it look like now in virtual settings. Again, how are we going to make sure that this is taught at the beginning of each remote session, an instruction session with students? How do we have teachers define this and then teach this and give the prompts to our routines for remote instruction until all students are demonstrating those behaviors. We can also think about our school-wide matrix from a home and community perspective. How can we help families be the most successful as possible with remote instruction? So during the spring, we did put out some resources with some recordings for helping families develop a family matrix. Those are on our website under the families, on the families page. So that might be helpful. If you're going 100% virtual, how are you going to provide some supports for families to support students in remote instruction? The next practice is that continuum of response for responding to inappropriate behavior. We're thinking about defining problem behavior definitions and having policies in place. So these TFI components are our T-chart, what's office managed, what's classroom managed, and how do we support staff to manage inappropriate behaviors in their classroom, and having the policies and procedures to document major office discipline behavior. So we have, how do we use that data for problem solving? So traditionally, that's going to look like, we have it defined. We have that T-chart. We have a flow chart for supporting staff in responding. We ensure that teacher voice is a part of developing that, and we communicate that well. Hybrid and remote, we might need to think about going back and reviewing our T-chart. Are things different? Which behaviors are classroom versus office managed? Are there some additional behaviors that we need to consider in our virtual environment? Do we need to think about the procedures for documenting? Currently in your system, if you are in person, traditional, it probably means a teacher fills out a hard copy office discipline referral and sends the student down to the office. That's probably not what's going to be happening in a remote instruction environment. So what is your process going to be? Do they fill out an office discipline referral virtually? If you're a Swiss using school, we have our Swiss master on here today with Diane Lemaster, but I know that there is a teachers can complete that digitally. But how are you going, what's your new process going to be if you were virtual? So lots of things to think about. And how do you support staff in thinking about their continuum of response to inappropriate behavior for distal learning? So here's an example of what that behavioral flow chart might look like. This is from the Tier 1 content. If you're looking to modify yours, we can help with this example. But the pieces that you're thinking of, what's our current procedure for when an office managed behavior occurs, and how do we have that data documented? Your team is still going to want data for problem solving, and some of that data will still be coming from office discipline referral forms, and so you want to make sure that there's a process that's going to work for your returning to learn plan. Here's the continuum of a continuum of response to inappropriate behavior. This is what we typically look at for in-person learning. Doesn't mean that every strategy for responding to inappropriate behavior is here, but it's a continuum. And what's your continuum that you support staff to use? And what's that going to look like virtually? So I will tell you, this was a piece that until I broke down all of the TFI, I hadn't got to in my brain. I hadn't started thinking about how do teachers manage behavior virtually? And so what's that going to look like? So again, some considerations are really prevention, just like in the classroom, is critical. It's going to be key that all teachers have expectations for how they set up a virtual classroom, how they set up virtual instruction. And so establishing those expectations and teaching those and prompting those at the beginning of each session is going to be very, very important. We've been talking about using behavior specific praise virtually. We know we can continue to do that, but maybe a tip would be, maybe we have some statements in a document that I can easily cut and paste. So I'm in the middle of instruction. I give students, I'm going to give you 1 minute to solve this problem on your own, and then we're all going to share our answers. In that 1 minute, I'm giving out some behavior specific praise statements privately via chat. And if I have them typed up and I can add a name in or make a slight modification, that might make me more efficient in doing that. Or at least have me think about some behavior specific praise I can give prior to. We need to, I mentioned the reteaching or teaching at the beginning. We may need opportunities for reteaching. So if we know all students are struggling coming on to Zoom and finding materials, I might need to reteach that procedure and where are the materials at for today. We might have to schedule some small group reteaching via Zoom. We might establish a signal or a nonverbal cue. Maybe it's for the whole class. Maybe there's some individual students. If I know Kara is going to need some more prompts to stay engaged and stay at her computer, then maybe I have a prompt and a visual cue that we establish together, right? So going through that continuum of response and thinking, what can this look like virtually? And I'm not sure that there's any one expert out there that has all those answers, but your teachers also are the experts, and they are the ones that if you can give some ideas, how could you even give some time for them to collaborate together to think about which strategies and practices are working and how they do those things. So sometimes it's not about giving all the answers, but creating the space for them to have the time to collaborate. So we want to give you guys another opportunity to connect in those small groups and share some ideas. So this time in your groups, if you guys can share out and have some dialogue around how you're defining expectations, rules, and routines for your remote return to learning plan, and how are you thinking about preventing and responding to problem behavior. So we'll give you. Yeah, sorry, Diane. We'll give you guys about 7 minutes or so in your small groups, and Diane will open breakout.
I'm going to make you a host because the tornado's going off here.
Yeah, no problem. Got it.
All right, I will.
All right, as you guys are coming back in, it is great when you guys come back in, we see more faces, more familiar faces. We love that. What were some things that you guys shared out? Some ideas you heard or an idea you shared around those practices? You can share via chat or anyone can come off of mute.
We talked about, well, I mentioned getting the team to collect data other than using office referrals. Like that was one of my goals for last year, and then moving into this year, it's kind of like, how do we write an quote unquote office referral when we're full remote? So thinking about how to collect data other than using the office referral.
Lakeisha, have you ever heard it sort of reframed as people getting away from office discipline referrals and creating time out of instruction documents? So it's no longer listed as an office discipline.
No, that's new.
That is one of the ways people are starting to do it. I think it's probably more the schools that are integrating mental health are kind of getting their brain wrapped around that, but it really helps track how much instruction kids are missing. And you could probably do that virtually, I would guess.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? What was that? Can you repeat that? Like instead of office referrals, could you elaborate a little bit?
Time out of instruction documents, or instead of a office discipline referral, it's a time out of instruction. So basically, right, it helps teams and everybody remember that an office discipline referral is not a consequence, that's a data tracker. And it allows us to really begin focusing on the fact that what we need to know is how much time kids are missing instruction. Right. So it just kind of reframes it a little bit.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
And not that this is helpful for remote instruction, but you know, one of those time out of instruction is students that visit the nurse or go down to the office, wherever they get some emotional support. And you know, so if we shift that time out of instruction, it helps to really think more than just externalizing behavior. Megan, you're mentioning some schools in Delaware collected asset and connectedness data. So using school climate data and instructional data. So the next section we're going to is around data. So some of these examples are great for helping us think in that term of, you know, how are we going to be identifying students for additional support as we are remote, possibly remote instruction. Keeping expectations in front of us and students when we are meeting virtually was what Beth shared. So that was something that your group talked about, and making sure that we define what the expectations are, and then visually posting those just like we would in our physical classroom, right? We'd want those to be posted. Cue card, sorry, I missed Dorothy's. Yes, creating cue cards for behavioral strategies, highlighting interventions on the flow chart. Yes. So just thinking through some of those pieces. So hopefully we're getting your brain started in some thinking. And as you guys have examples, we'd love to continue to see those. So Diane, I think we'll pass it to you for data.
Okay, the tornado siren stopped, and now it's just a storm with a lot of hail. Maybe I'll get a new roof out of it. I don't know. But anyway, it's all good. And we'll move on. So it was a little dicey a little bit ago when the tornado sirens were going on. So this section is a little bit smaller as we start to do a little wrap up. It's around data. And really that's the core and just central to all the features of MTSS. And so as we look overall at the data and using data for decision making, whether you're in person or this is a hybrid type of back to school plan, or you're starting out all remotely, it covers these particular components of the tiered fidelity inventory. Your 112, which is your discipline data. So looking at all of that data that you're collecting. And how are you going to collect this data if you are in a remote setting? What's the plan for tracking behaviors remotely? That's going to look differently than tracking those behaviors when you're in person on site in a building. It's also that fidelity data, that tiered fidelity inventory data, the self-assessment survey data, that's that staff perception data. All of those pieces, those data pieces that we enter data into PBIS assessments. Every school has an account, and we want to use that fidelity data to help us measure how are we doing at implementing Tier 1 supports. How do our staff feel we're implementing Tier 1 supports? What's their perception? How do we as a team see we're implementing Tier 1 supports? So that fidelity data is key. And then just making sure we do that annually. We've got those scheduled as an annual evaluation, and sharing that data with our stakeholders, not just with our team members, but sharing all of that data with our staff, with our families, with your Board of Education, with your district, the cabinet, with your community members. So making sure that we are sharing that data that's in a very friendly, usable format with all of our stakeholders. So traditional in-person, this is where we're in the buildings, and we have a Tier 1 team that's going to meet at least monthly. That team reviews school-wide discipline data. We're looking at that data for decision-making and action planning. We're looking at other data sources. We may be looking at attendance data, some other various nurses' logs. We're going to look at some of those other data pieces. This is a team that's completing the TFI, completing it annually to check their fidelity and help action plan around what components are we really strong at, what components do we need to focus our efforts on as a team. Again, this is also then looking at self-assessment survey data as well as school climate surveys. So on PBIS assessments, there are school climate surveys for students, for staff and for families. So if, you know, I know some districts and some schools are using 5 essentials. It's very similar to that, but it's something you might want to consider. Again, it's free for all schools. Every school has an account, and it gives you some really great data around their perceptions of how they feel the social climate and culture in the building is. And it breaks it down. It breaks that data down and aggregates it by grade, by male, female, by gender, by ethnicity. It really does break it down, and you get a lot of different data points from those school climate surveys. So something to think about or check out if you're interested in getting that and having that data from your families and from your staff as well as your students. But those are all those in person. When you meet every month, you're looking at school-wide data, you are, you know, you're together, you're around a table, and you're making some action plans and doing decision-making based on that data. And so a little bit on data, and why do we use data for decision-making? We know that it helps us ask the right questions, but doesn't necessarily provide the answers for us. But it helps us as a team identify our problems, help us to refine those problems, and then get to the questions that are going to lead to the solution. And most importantly, it helps us place the problem in the context rather than pointing at the students. So it helps us figure out, where are we seeing our problem behaviors? What do we need to do in that particular context, that particular location, to help change and shape the behaviors of our students? So this is in the Tier 1 workbook. We also have this as a separate resource on our website under Tier 1 materials. It's the TIPS team meeting agenda format. Again, TIPS standing for Team Initiated Problem Solving. It's a problem solving method that looks at team foundations as well as the problem solving process. And what's encircled there in red is when you meet as a team, this is really where you spend your time as a team. You'll see here on the left side of this lower part of this meeting minute agenda, it says precision problem statement. And this is where your data analyst is going to utilize your data, get a precision statement. As a team, he's going to bring that to the team meeting. Then as a team, you're going to set a goal, a timeline, develop some action plans, set a fidelity as well as student outcome measure, and then work your plan. So that's why it's so important. The front half of this training is all about who's on your team and the various roles, and what a data analyst does, and what a data entry minute taker does, a facilitator does. And then it's reviewing that problem solving process of what do we need to do as a team. So if you're looking for some kind of a template or a format, consider this, take a look at it. You can type in it, all the boxes expand. It's a means to be able to track everything you're doing as a team. If you follow this format and follow the flow of this format, this is all you need to do as a team when you're looking at your data. And a little bit on problem solving. Again, this is that TIPS model where everything we're doing as a team is around not only collecting, but utilizing our data and using that for decision making. So starting at the top with our data analyst, who's getting in, he's doing drill down and data mining, he's developing a precision problem statement, brings that to the team. Now as a team, we are reviewing that precision statement, we identify our goal, we start to develop and identify solutions. We're going to implement that solution, that action plan with fidelity, high integrity. As adults are doing what they're supposed to be doing, we're implementing with fidelity. From there, we're going to look at our data. We'll follow up on that. We'll monitor what our data is saying against our plan and how are we doing with it, and then make a decision based on that. Did we meet our goal? Do we need to tweak the plan in some way? So this is a continuous cycle that we can, continually go from month to month as we meet as a team, working on our specific problem statements and developing action plans. If we're in a hybrid or remote type of a situation, and honestly, I think most schools going back are going to either be in a hybrid where the kids are there a couple days a week or totally remotely, we want to determine how we're going to collect our discipline data while the students are learning remotely. One example, and I think Katie mentioned this earlier, is if you are a Swiss school, if you keep your discipline data in Swiss, there is a feature within Swiss where teachers can enter their office referrals directly into Swiss. So now we don't have to worry about a paper copy. There's not going to be anybody to turn a paper copy into and then have them go ahead and enter that if we were in the building. This way they can enter it directly into Swiss. If you don't use Swiss, what other ways can you collect that discipline data? How will you get that data as a team? And your team can meet remotely. You can have a Zoom team meeting once a month. Everybody is there. We're just not physically in the same room, but we're still looking at our data. We're looking at our data from our students in a remote setting. So I think the first question is, how are we going to collect that data, what that's going to look like? And then how do we, what system, what platform application are we going to enter that data, and how are we going to utilize that as a tier 1 team to utilize that data for decision making? As a team, whether you are hybrid or remote, you can still continue to action plan from the TFI. So take the tiered fidelity inventory. I'd put that on one of our first meetings, one of our agenda items for one of our first meetings, August, September, October. Get that on your agenda and take the TFI. If you don't have a local coordinator for your district to open that, contact me and I can go ahead and get that open for you and take that tiered fidelity inventory as you start this new school year. The same with the self-assessment survey or that school climate survey. If you don't have a local coordinator, contact me and I'd be happy to open that and send you the link so you can get that staff perception data. You can also, check out that school climate survey, get the data, get the perception data of your students on how they feel things are in school remotely on a Google or a Zoom classroom. So you can still have those meetings, still gather that data and use that for decision making. This example, it's a little bit hard to see, but it's an example that's shared from Sandburg Elementary in District 186 in Springfield, as they started to shift to tracking data during spring of 2020 when we all went and shut down during pandemic. And each teacher had their own tab within a Google Sheet. So this is a Google Sheet. Each teacher had their own individual tab. And they had contacts with students. They were documenting the contacts with students within this spreadsheet. So that way they could keep track of the students that they had regular contact with, or students that they couldn't, contact. They weren't getting on their Google classrooms. And then those kids were flagged by your school social worker, the administrator, or nurse to keep contact or try to attempt to make contact with the family. So it was their way to be able to make sure they're touching base with every student and not really losing touch with all of our students that they so desperately needed in on their remote lessons. So it was kind of a nice example of the way they did this to be able to make sure we were trying to touch base with all of our students. And then this is an example, and Katie, you can, or Amy, where this actually came from, but this is just some sample questions for how you can monitor not only your student, but your family wellness, because this isn't just about the students and how they are in a remote setting. This really affects families. They're gonna be home doing their lessons. Family members might still be working from home, trying to do their Zoom calls and their check-ins with their work. And so this is just a means to check in with not only your students, but your families. So just kind of identify a few questions that you might use for screening, a way to just check in with your students and check in on their social, emotional, behavioral needs. Is there a process you have for defining students who may need something more, who may need a little bit of extra check-in for those students that just what you're providing in your Google Classroom or your Zoom classroom won't be enough. So an example there. And then again, if we can share, and we were going to do this, I believe, in chat, Katie?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I thought so. I didn't think we were going into rooms yet or at this point in time. So just in chat real quickly, just what's your current plan? Just kind of what, do you have a plan, or are there any ideas you can come up with for how you might use data in this school year, since it's going to look so differently? What's your plan right now for your team? Are you going to collect that TFI data, going to collect that staff perception data, the self-assessment survey data? Have you guys even really thought about this at this point? How are you going to collect office referral data? How are you going to track behaviors in a remote setting? I think this is the best part where we can really share and hear what's going on in other places. So feel free to unmute and let us know that. You can put your voice in the room or put it in chat. We'd really appreciate it. Okay, and I'm gonna open my chat as well.
Diane, can you just move it to the slide that says coaching skills? Or
Yep.
Or let me start sharing. One of the others.
This one? Yep.
Okay. So while you're writing in chat, we know that we have 4 minutes. So I'd like to ask your forgiveness. We're kind of trying to get the hang of how much content and how much team time. And so if you have any feedback about that, please let us know. So we're not going to have a chance to go over these coaching skills in depth, but I want you to know that they are in the PowerPoint. Active listening, asking questions, and descriptive feedback. And then Diane, would you slip 2 more?
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to respond to chat.
So we want you to start thinking about what coaching is going to look like in all 3 settings. And that might need, how are you going to use active listening, asking questions, and descriptive feedback as a coach in team meetings, in staff meetings, in office hours, check-ins with staff, virtual staff lounge time during lunch? Like, how are we going to do this as being a coach? And then you saw one of the routines in one of those matrices had some information in it at the bottom as well about kind of what's expected of staff, but you could also go in and give them ideas of how they can count on you as a coach and what you can offer them. On our website, I put a note in the chat earlier where you can find some of those coaching documents. And then I'm gonna, let's see, Diane, will you flip slides for me again? And again, and again. So, 1 back. So here's the list of all of our, if you go 1 back, all of our free Coaches Network meetings this year. So please give us feedback. We listen to you when you talk to us. So our plan is to have 1 hour topic-based and then 1 hour topic-based TA and networking. So we'll send you more information about that. And then on the next slide, Diane, if you advance, it will show you our training plan for the school year. So the dates are slowly being put up, well, quickly in my mind, being put up on our website for you to check out. 1 more. 1 more. All right, and then we would love for you to look into coming to our virtual PBIS leadership forum. This is the one that's held in Chicago, but it's going to be virtual this year, and the format's going to be different. It's going to be 3 days. There are going to be 13 sessions and 8 strands. So you're going to choose 6 to 7. There are going to be 6 to 7 concurrent topics in 2 time periods. So basically, you're going to be able to go through the conference with sessions that follow each other and are connected. So we hope that you'll consider that. And before I let you go, I have 1 minute. We want to share this poem with you. No, that's a statement, not really a poem.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure.
Okay.
We want to share this statement with you. I don't know if you know this or not, but the National Center is evaluated regularly from the federal government to see if we're doing what we say we're doing. And our project officer through the Office of Special Ed is Renee Bradley, and she just shared this recently. So I'm going to read it to you. And then on your way out, if you could give us a 1 to 5 of your experience of today, that would be great. 5 being like, this was worth my time. 1 being like, I meant to be in the basement for a tornado drill. So here goes. What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us all to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change. We declare change, we work for change, we become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather it's the most important year of them all. So, something to think about. We appreciate you, and anything you can leave us in the chat box on your way out would be awesome.
Yep. Thanks, guys, very much. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Tornadoes and all. It's been a fun afternoon.
Yeah, it's moved to Springfield, Illinois. It looks so weird.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so share your 1 to 5 rating. We'd also love to hear any action steps you're taking away and any feedback you have as we shift our Coaches Network meetings to virtual platform. Thanks, everybody.